understand it. I mean, that's complete nonsense, right? It can be taught to anyone. It is intuitive to some degree, and it's not like an intelligence thing.
And we had some placards, one of them which said the pretty factual point that Zionism is racism.
It's not just a moral stand, it's a political stand. What you're talking about is the role that Israel plays securing the interests of US and British imperialism in the Middle East.
And it would be talking about Iraq or Afghanistan or something today where I am, and I understand these conflicts that have literally been going on since I was born. It's just horrifying.
It's not British culture, it's just the world's culture. They love stories, they love this idea that there is this nation that looks like this. I think it's a distraction from the class struggle, to be honest.
Thank you for again tuning into Revolutionary Lumpen Radio. Of course, at the end of the intro then you just heard Zola from the part 1 of Diaspora Britain, where we talked about race, religion, social segregation. In this episode we get to continue that conversation and even go further into some of the themes such as religion, social segregation and what it does for the psyche of both immigrants and the British population. Not going to spend too long on the intro, I'm going to go into it now, but please just listen to this disclaimer. We're categorising different groups of human beings, such as calling them Muslims, Christians, British population, people from the Middle East, all kinds of immigrants. Of course, this is part of religion, it's there to separate people into different groups so that one group is better than the other group, and then all these little groups can fight amongst themselves and then keep them from uniting against the ruling class bourgeoisie. So, please recognise that whilst we oppose categorising different human beings into different groups, in order for us to accurately navigate around these intricate issues and problems that this categorisation faces, we have to at least use the vocabulary that enables you to recognise what kind of group of people we're talking about. So please recognise we're against categorisation, of course we're against racism, but we just have to use some of the language and putting people into groups, so it sounds counterintuitive, but I hope you recognise it's not. So we're going to go into the interview now with Zola, part 2, Diaspora Britain, racism, religion and social segregation. Bush. Okay, cool. Welcome back on the show, Zola. Very happy to have you back on with us. I really think we've done a great job last time on the discussions that we were talking about, extremely important topics. I really hope that people can empathise. I'm sure they can. And we didn't really finish off on everything that we were talking about. We still had a few more questions to go through, so thanks for coming back on the show so that we can finish this off. Oh, it's my pleasure. So without further ado, shall we crack on? Next up, I've got a closely related topic on what we were discussing last time, and it's going to be an interesting question. So, how, in your opinion, do you think that we can get more left engagement on a human level rather than any kind of political, liberal level? So, my question to you is, how, in your opinion, can people transcend politics, patriotism, and really connect with the fellow human when we're talking about these discussions? I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this, and then I'll also share my own.
I think this is a really good question because sometimes people don't actually listen to podcasts like this because they don't feel engaged. I think the first point in how we can make them feel more engaged about it is relevance. For example, if you see the recent history of Poland or Romania, many Eastern European migrants that at least I've met, they are proof that communism in their countries didn't work. And that's why they think that if that is the reason why they have suffered, then traveling and getting a good life here is probably the best thing for them, right? And it's also similar to migrants from former colonies when they glorify the very reason their countries need a miracle to be independent, because their countries aren't independent because of, like England or France or something. So they depend on capitalism by traveling here and getting a good job, but it exploits them for their own gain, and they don't see that because they are now getting much more benefits than they were in their home country. So I don't think we can ignore that when it comes, where they're coming from. Otherwise, they wouldn't listen to people on the left, because they think that it is because of their own, their own shortcomings that they're not rich or whatever. And then they go to our countries and they get jobs. And then suddenly they think that, capitalism worked out for them when it didn't. It has to be relevant, and also to highlight the maximization of pleasure that we all get from having a socialist country, because that's the truth in the world. We live for pleasure. If anyone is saying that we're living for the glory of our nation or for the glory of anything else, that's just dogma. For example, most of the former colonies, they don't relate to each other's independence, even though they all struggled to gain independence from the same Britain, but they don't relate to each other because they don't feel the story is relevant.
Yeah, good stuff there, Zola. Absolutely agree with for all of it. It's very interesting. I'm just going to talk out some points that you mentioned. So people in Eastern Europe who are living proof that communism failed in their countries. Yeah, you see these people, so even if you defend communism or socialism online, these are the people who are like, I live in Estonia, or I live in, Lithuania, and we know that the Soviet Union fell, communism failed, and capitalism is the only way forward. And it's like, how can you as a Westerner argue with these people for communism when it's failed in their country? Of course, the reason for it failing is because the Soviet Union was getting attacked left, right and centre, and within its own country. Communism was constantly seen as the world's biggest enemy. And, again, the US was willing to blow up the entire world to defeat communism. That's how far they were willing to go. So, yeah, that's why communism failed in their countries. But, despite this, you can't just say that and then expect people to go, okay, yeah, no, you're right, I'm a communist again. So it's very interesting, and just a down to earth, level you're on. And I properly love your perspective. So mentioning people want to leave those countries and come over to the West, and how can you argue against that, because they're over there in a failed communist state, which is now just a massive military base for NATO. And of course their alternative is to have a better life in a country like the UK, where you can get a telly and a couch and a washing machine and a dryer on credit from flipping Bright House or Argos or something, and get access to finance and credit cards. So these people are definitely going to have better lives over here. But of course that's the whole point in how the world's set up, is so they can come over and be cheap labour. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, interesting points, good to analyse and add some perspective, because we definitely can't and shouldn't ignore where they're coming from, particularly when we are trying to engage them more towards the left. Yeah, very well said. Please continue.
So most people aren't subject matter experts, of course, and I'm not one. I don't read theory like I've read in your I've seen in your podcast. You do quote a lot of theory that I'm not a subject matter expert, and that's why I think we need to contextualize how beneficial socialism, or how beneficial, for example, the Marxist-Leninist analysis that you have been giving in your podcast, it is. We need to show that, because a lot of humanist organization and humanist help that we have, they are 100% a leftist approach to deal with the failings of capitalism, but it fails to deliver why it does that. Why do these organizations do that, and why does capitalism fail? And people are forgetful. I don't think the left has one face. We all have this part of us that is the left. I don't think the migrant workers that come to Britain, they're not they're not benefiting from capitalism. And at the end of the day, all they want is just a maximization of pleasure. And if we can show that if we eradicate the reason of suffering in the first place, which is capitalism, it just has to be relevant. Because again, every single country has a story that is irrelevant to the other country, because we don't focus on the ruling class or class struggle. That is something that is universal between us, and that's what makes the story relevant.
Yeah, again, correctamundo. I'm just going to bring out a few points. So when it comes to theory and educating, this is a massive part in spreading class consciousness. Class consciousness is important because this is how you tell people that no, all the problems in your life are caused from a specific class of people, and here is how, through the theory, through Marx's telling you about capital and just explaining money, labour, and then you've got other philosophers and thinkers talking about culture, and this is how you connect the individual story of one person with the life story of somebody else. So all these people have problems in their life, which you mentioned, which are separate from one country to another, yet the problems ultimately derive from capitalism. So this is where alienation is so important, and feeding people racism is to alienate one person's life story from another. And this is why hate and separation is great, because if people do talk about their life, we'll all see that we're all workers being exploited by bosses. We're all citizens of capitalist nations. So yeah, good point, Solar. So we just mentioned money there. Let's talk about your thoughts on the root of all evil, as well as centrism.
The idea of money is something a lot of people don't understand, even though they use every day. For example, I see so many people saying, I don't like politics, when they realize that I have a very strong opinion on it, and that they are told that this is a kind of a scare opinion. Anything on the left is more of a scare opinion to them. So when I say something like that, and then they're like, I don't like politics, because they don't want to have this conversation. But then how come you have a wallet? How come you have a credit card? Because money is, in our world where democracy isn't entirely true, you have options between the far right and the far right. That's not democracy. So if in a world where you don't really have options, money is the only way you're actually voting for something. Money and, of course, your labor, because in capitalism, your labor is essentially just worth money. You're just selling your time and you're buying money. So you can't say, if you say I don't like politics, and then you have money and you buy things and you decide to support companies that perhaps exploit their workers or something, what are you saying about yourself? I don't think centrism is pacifism. I think centrism is a way of saying that they are okay with the ruling class, and that they're okay with what's currently happening. Because if I had a socialist country, I wouldn't be, I would then probably maybe be a centrist, because then I don't care, right? Because then I'd be happy. But if you're centrist and you're saying centrism doesn't mean you don't like politics, it actually means you're supporting the idea of having what we're having right now, And I think because people are so afraid of being called on the left, that there are some great people that actually have they're still here right now and in power and everything. There are some great people, but they don't like to call themselves on the left. For example, Merkel is actually center right, but it was because of her and I don't know the guy before her, but it was because of what happened after the unification of Germany in the EU. The contribution that they have done has actually brought a lot of prosperity to Europe, to the European Union. It is actually essentially socialist ideas and socialist principles, and it is remarketed under capitalism in order not to threaten the ruling class. But it is the closest thing that we have gone from capitalism to fade slowly into a socialist kind of thing. As what you were saying before, people, people that come from these ideas of like, we should be afraid of communism, these people actually suffered because of capitalism. And that's why you see Cuba, like you were saying, it was having, like so many countries are opposing to it. That's why capitalism is toxic. It doesn't allow people to have a different opinion. How can you call this democracy? And then whenever capitalism fails, which is, for example, now when we have the corona thing, and you can see in America, they don't have many socialist ideas. They don't have health insurance. So what they're doing is that they're giving people tax returns. They're giving people, I forgot what the name of it was. It was a second check that they gave them. And it is simply just quick fix socialism. It's just like a bandage that they put on the failing capitalism instead of addressing the main issue. That's why ideas like grassroots organization or like bringing it to the community around you, because people have to know what the benefits are for socialism. They have to understand that it's because what capitalism does, they buy their votes. For example, would you vote for a rich man?
No.
Because if you don't vote for him and he doesn't become rich, you won't have a job because he's the one who gave you your job. That's the principle of capitalism. And I believe that's why people vote for, in America at least, they vote for rich people because they think rich man gives jobs, therefore we have to vote for a rich man. But it's essentially buying their vote. And it's funny because I've always heard that communist countries buy their voters, and they just have to look in the mirror. Whoever's saying this has to look in the mirror because that's what capitalism does. So if we have grassroots organization, just again to the point of like being relevant to the community around us, if we show people what exactly socialism even means and what it would do to their lives, they would vote for this. And it's not, and it is not buying their votes, it is their own belief.
Yeah, beautifully said, Zola. So just touching upon centrists, of course, are people who say they're not left-wing, they're not right-wing, they just stay in the middle, they just want to go through their individual life, of course, as consumers, and not really take a side. But as you mentioned, of course, as long as you've got money, as long as you've got a wallet, you're participating in the economic system of globalization. That's just what it is. You're being an active participant in capitalism. So whether you choose to, go out there with a Che Guevara flipping sign or like a Donald Trump sign, like you're still participating in politics, you mad people. So these people really remind me of flat earthers, and it's a bit of a mad analogy, but just to say flat earthers, I think, are people who aren't willing to accept the world that we live in, the world of course being a huge globe, a blue marble travelling through space, hurtling around the Milky Way, around the sun, just the beauty and the miracle of life and DNA forming on planet Earth to get us to the point where we're sentient and we're wandering the Earth with seemingly no other purpose but to explore the planet and explore ourselves and explore everything our senses can pick up to, again, as you say, to experience the best life. So to me, I think the biggest problem with these flat earthers is, and how they relate to centrists, is the fact that they're not willing to accept reality as it is, because as it is currently is a miracle of life being heavily exploited and raped by capitalism and by the ruling class. So it's easier to turn around and say, no, this is not how it is. We didn't come from the Big Bang and all these celestial bodies form out of gases, because if that happened, then why are we destroying the planet? Why are we destroying each other? Why are we murdering each other? Why are we against each other? Why is there all this hate? So that, to me, is the underlying fundamental of why I think flat earthers exist, because it's too hard to believe a government that would take advantage of all of life on planet Earth in such a way. So they turn to a conspiracy theory, and centrists are almost in the same, because not recognising that the world is either capitalist or communist, and it is fermented on class struggle, is really burying your head in the sand. And that's, essentially what flat earthers are doing. They're burying their head in the sand because the world doesn't make sense to them. Yeah, so I've rambled enough now. Please go on to liberalism.
Yeah, definitely. About actually the idea of liberalism, this is my second point. I think liberal media is also a big part in why youth, especially nowadays, are not being more socialist, because they like to derail situations. For example, capitalist horror stories like a homeless man is just shown as, hey, look at this charitable person giving money, but instead, why is this person homeless? And you see like they've juggled jobs, they've just got sick, and then it's horror stories, and they just derail the conversation into not even focusing into a lack of class conscience, basically, if I am to sum it up. Also, the idea of social justice warriors, for a lack of better term, basically any kind of activism is just gone into the extreme side of liberalism, which has also a lack of class conscience and materialism and consumerism, like that kind of heightened level of consumerism. Like, that's why a lot of people nowadays are becoming more onto the far right, because they think the world is just, especially people on the right, think the world is like a two-sided coin. It's either you're on the far right or you're a social justice warrior. They don't understand what communism it stands for, because that is what the media portrays. Like, if you're not conservative, if you're not sex positive, then you're immediately on the far right, which is not true. For example, we on the left, we're against apartheid. We're against a lot of values that perhaps conservatives do see and would criticize if they're not the ones doing it. I believe that conservatives that really do hate apartheid in certain countries would have no issue if it was them on the top. And because of that, they think that social justice warriors are just the enemy, or like if they're not this, then they have to be that. Right, there's this other term that a friend of mine, he's a Marxist, he told me about. He's basically like this whole cultural bullshit. I call it scare words. For example, Hillary Clinton and what's his name, Joe Biden. Am I pronouncing this one right?
I think it's pronounced creepy pedo scumbag with no memory.
Like Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, these people are far from anything on the left, and I'm really, really, really disappointed in Bernie. I'm really disappointed in Bernie because he's chickening out. He's saying we should not have billionaires. We should abolish billionaires, which is a great sentence. And then he chickens out to people who have no relation whatsoever to the left. And people are like, yeah, maybe friends of a center-left person, which they consider apparently a socialist, like friends of this person must also be socialist. And this is so far from the truth. Like, I hate it when media portrays people that are really on the right just masquerading as leftists for no reason and acting like, yeah, we're gonna hate this person because he's not even on the left. And even if he was, you shouldn't be talking about the left without understanding it. This is the one thing that creates a kind of distance between people and information, and like true information on the left.
Yeah, you're on a very astute observation. So just on liberalism, of course these liberals have done nothing except grow up by state schooling, state education, state television. Everything to do with the state has helped form how they think. It's taught them the language, it's taught them how to dress, it's taught them how to treat one another. That's all a liberal is, basically. It's just a battery for capitalism, and it takes, again, class consciousness to break out of this, this thought pattern in which they've used normal plasticity, your neurons forming in your brain of a shape specifically in order to benefit capitalism, in order to benefit your nation, our brains are shaped in such a way just to be robots for capitalism. That's just how, neural pathways in the brain are formed. And when it comes to, I always knew Bernie was a class traitor, scumbag anyway, so to tell you the truth, there is a point in having Bernie. There was a point in saying Bernie's left wing and saying he's communist and socialist. It's to direct the people's attention. Lenin mentioned that they'll do this to neutralise communist movements when it gets so strong and so, prevalent, that they'll actually pick up so-called left-wing politicians and then have them run for elections, because what you have is people joining the SA and giving all hundreds of pounds or dollars, and poor people giving Bernie's campaign donations, believing he's some flipping new Karl Marx running for government. It's a joke, it's a scam. People fall for it. Again, that's why I've always said, if you're a Bernie supporter, you're a liberal, because you blatantly are. All of Bernie's campaign donations that have been taken off poor people are probably in the Biden campaign now. This is how absurd it is. It's a joke here that genuinely makes me sick. I'm not going to try and go on it for too long. It could be a podcast all in itself, but these are genuinely things just to distract people from. Actually, just imagine all of these campaign donations that Bernie got. If people actually donated them to the local revolutionary organisations, those local revolutionary organisations could have done mass mutual aid. They would have had food banks all around the country right now when people are being laid off the jobs. But instead, Bernie's bank is packed with all of people's working class donations. It makes me sick, and this is why we always say, don't do electoral politics. If you're a liberal castrator, support your local revolutionary organisation, because they need it more. Even if you're not going to be involved in politics, just donate to your local revolutionary organisation, help them out. This is how we'll form systems in place, so that when again the economy comes down on us working people, we're already out there supporting each other with these systems in order to protect each other, whether it is food banks or whether it is other mutual aid schemes. Point being, it is genuinely planned out to be this way. It's it's nothing unique. Just additionally, before we move on, I just want to say, let's look in a year or 2, 3 years when the next candidate runs, and then people who genuinely were apparently socialist during the Bernie campaign are now no longer socialism, because they're going to be out there saying, oh no, we tried 4 years ago, I'm not going to try socialist again because it failed. And even if Bernie would have won, it would have been imperialism for 4 years, and then after that people would just think, oh no, we had socialism in America, there was all of these problems, we're never going to have socialism again, even though it was never socialism. But alas, let's move on now, because I'm fuming already. Let's move on to your third point, online engagement.
I think this is a golden time with Corona, because for the longest time there has been so many far-right recruitment that's been going on the internet, and this is the golden time that we can reach real people. I mean, people that belong to the working class, that have their bad and good experiences. Especially now, I have seen in Australia, I have seen teachers organizing, because there's in so many countries. Capitalism is just failing on the same scale. People are, employers are refusing to pay. They're starting to test their luck with vulnerable employees. And one thing we're not doing is using their own terms and arguing with them. So, before there was a left podcast like this on the internet, most of the time you'd go into forums and you'd find that the right has created a bunch of scare words for themselves. They created this new vocabulary that no one in real life uses.
Just to interrupt a sec, the left do this too. That's why I hate Chapos. They make me sick with all of these stupid terms that they use.
And they use these terms. So, for example, if you put on Google some bogus statistic about racism that they have created, all the results will be the ones that they have found. So it's like we are all on the clear net, but they have their own layer of the internet that you won't see. And especially thanks to Google's algorithm and YouTube's algorithm, I'm not blaming them, but thanks to this algorithm, you just get recommended from one thing to the other. I think there's a term, some YouTuber coined this term. It's called the PewDie pipeline, and it was actually analyzing I think it was called Christchurch shooting, the one in New Zealand, the shooting in New Zealand. It was an excellent video. I think it's 30 minutes long. I think our viewers should listen to this one, because it basically explains how you can have like one side of the internet that completely doesn't talk to the other side, especially even now, like even this conversation we're having, every single conversation on the internet is an echo chamber, just as it is in real life. But because of this corona thing, I think we should engage with people. We should utilize this, because right now, if we look at how things were 100 years ago, history is kind of repeating itself. We're seeing people not having jobs, and then suddenly they're going to go into the extremities, and this is the perfect time for us to prevent that. We think we're better than that, though, and then the ignorant stay ignorant because they search for the wrong words that only the far right uses. I think we could use this chance to speak to each other, to encourage online engagement, and just have a discussion, just talk about, because everyone, even if they think that they are capitalist, everyone right now is experiencing a lack of job security and seeing the failings of capitalism.
Once again, some very interesting points there. I'm going to touch upon a couple now. So one thing, I don't know whether it's called the PewDie pipeline or something, but I'm thinking of one thing, and I think the PewDie pipeline's another. So the PewDie pipeline is basically how these terminologies can lead to violence, what is it, and how to avoid it, how edgy humour leads to violence. Some search results show me, but I mean that's what it is. It's to make a joke out of extremely serious situations, because people themselves are living jokes to capitalism, and they're really articulating themselves as people, as consumers to capitalism. They're articulating, of course, how their brain is hardwired, and that is living, breathing jokes, because that's what we've become. We have to use satire, and we have to use, again, you've heard that term, if we don't laugh we'll cry, and that's really what it is, to an extreme point, except with all of people's added insecurities and racism and classism, all a part of their consciousness. Right, the next point, extremely important. Other people let this sink in. It is something I don't know exactly what it is or where I've heard it, but it's definitely in my brain. I've heard it from somebody somewhere extremely intelligent, and it is this concept which you talked about, where everybody themselves are just in echo chambers online. So that is to say that, of course, if you're browsing Reddit, you're only on the class traitor liberal communist subreddit, or the socialism subreddit, or even the even worse liberal, super liberal Chapo Trap House subreddit, which again brings about these terms. Like all of these terms, I don't even know them off the top of my head, because I avoid them that much. And people who use these terms on my subreddit do get, I'll look on the profile, and I'll always see that they're frequent Chapo Trap House posters, and then I'll just ban them, because I don't have terms like all of this. I don't even know what it is, but like the terms such as like TERFs and just basically all of these stupid fucking terms that come out of nowhere, and then suddenly like every one of these so-called socialists are using them. It again, as you said, it only separate people, so people are in their own echo chambers using these terms and are getting upvotes and social validation because they're with the trendy new terms that people all around the world use, rather than their own isolated nationalist or even like the culture from their city. Like I'll use, slang and that from Liverpool, but these these so-called socialists are using their own terms worldwide because of internet phenomenon and trends. And what good does that do? Well, it only does good for the right wing, because we all look like cringy children now. Thanks very much for that, by the way, people. So people again on the right are forced into deeper their own right-wing things. And you take an example of this is people in Facebook groups, for example. Facebook groups, if you run a Facebook group or you're part of a Facebook group, it's extremely exclusive to people with your ideology, whether it's left-wing or right-wing. It's extremely exclusive. And then you have people, these members and these leaders of the group who are constantly vigilant that nobody else with a separate opinion gets into these groups. And then we see it as like, we actually consider it as a form of infiltration, as a form of like, oh, these have got in, that they're trying some kind of cyber warfare, talking about their own opinions within our echo chamber. But what does that do when you've got two sides of the political spectrum? Of course the centrist on the right hand side as well. You've got them on their own side of the internet talking just bullshit to each other. Yeah, well done, Zola, bringing that out. It's great points, because the practical purpose of this is to not just give them shit and call them out for the cringe lords in which they are. The idea is to recognise that while everybody is forced into the home during coronavirus, we have to reach out to these people who would be isolated in their own groups and be able to actually use our brains and communicate them in a way that doesn't alienate ourselves, because we haven't used this internet culture that just somehow defines us as trendy, cool communists who are just, at the precipice of where we are as a movement and culture. That doesn't exist. We have to break through all of this and then just be able to speak to people, on their own terms, again with the express purpose of class consciousness and solidarity. And yeah, it may be difficult to actually achieve this and bridge this gap, but it is so true. People should absolutely consider just how many echo chambers there is on the internet. Now, my subreddit's the only one I know of, Late Stage Imperialism, that allows for liberals and, people with opposing left-wing views. I hate the term left-wing. I'm on about people who are coming out as communist, socialist, revolutionaries. I allow them on the subreddit, as long as you don't break Reddit terms and conditions, and I'll just label them with the term liberal or capitalist next to the name, so that when it comes to discussion, all of the members on the subreddit recognise that they're speaking to a liberal. And then what this does is it doesn't just make them go out on the attack going, oh, you're a liberal, you're a capitalist, you're a class traitor, blah blah blah. What it does is it helps them be able to recognise who they're talking to, so that they can more appropriately discuss and share our ideas and then have progressive conversation. And I have increasingly seen these liberals and capitalists actually make comments that have made me think, whoa, did they put that flair there themselves as a joke, only to find out that no, I actually put it there, but they are actually changing their opinion because people have engaged with them. So these ways we can do it, but let's just really go away and consider how to engage with extreme right-wing people, or not even that right-wing people, without again making ourselves look like cringe lords, and propagating and sharing cultures fermented on these within these echo chambers, because the world should not be an echo chamber. And you know, you see this in discords all the time. You see like people have got vetting. You've got to be able to accurately describe what is Marxist Leninism. You've got to think, what do you think of China? You know, all of these vetting questions. Again, on my Discord, I don't have a vetting. I don't give a shit. If you want to come on my Discord and speak. God damn it, I don't care what ideology you've got. You know, you want to break the rules and offend people, I'll ban you. But until then, what do I look like? You know what I mean? What do I look like? A class traitor or somebody who's trying to bring about solidarity? Come on, people. You know, as you said, the ignorant stay ignorant. But again, final point, yes, even the middle class who are blatantly capitalist, they can't work. I'm seeing people who were supposed to be next year inheriting the business that the dad's been building the whole entire life, and then suddenly, because of this coronavirus, the dad's forced to retire early, the business does not exist, and then this lad who was going to be like CEO of that business can no longer run this business that his dad's made, because now he's stacking shelves with me as a so-called key worker. You know what I'm saying? So this is like, even if you're middle class, you're still fucked because of capitalism, and we have got to express that and articulate that. And you know, who's to blame? Well, of course, it's capitalism itself. It's you know, the ruling class. But next up, as if people are probably already thinking this podcast is sectarian and offensive. I'm sorry if you think that. It's obviously not. I'm just talking real shit. But so let's move on now to the most controversial bit of this whole episode, but also something extremely important, because religion is something that's all around the world. It has been for thousands of years. It's something that ties people with spirituality and culture and belonging and love and prosperity in their life and routine. So let's go into your analysis of religions, especially with your background. This should be really interesting for people now. Again, I just want to re-emphasize the fact that whilst we are using categorizations of people, the whole express purpose of this is to break down the categorizations. But while the categorizations exist, we can't have a universal perception of people. So yeah, let's go into religion.
Definitely. I just hope that this is going to come off a little bit more blunt, because a lot of people don't like to talk about religion as you know, in a sense of being respectful.
Don't worry about it, mate.
Despite how I see it, I see religion as, you know, a big slap in the face for a lot of humanity, for a lot of cultures actually. I'll start with Islam because I was raised as one. I was raised in Muslim, and I think in the previous episode we did talk about ISIS and how their Paris attacks, and you know how ISIS being a Western created and more of a modern West created phenomenon, and how domestic terrorism is actually much more common. Like when we talk about domestic religious terrorism, it is definitely a thing that happens in Western countries, despite the statistics showing that domestic terrorism or Islamic terrorism is not even a thing. It's not even in good proportions. It's simply one of those things that, one of those scare words, so people don't, so people just point at the wrong person. You know, another form of tribalism or racism, but essentially. But the reason why this is happening, it's just simply happening only on the West. Right, in Muslim majority countries, the story is completely different, because it's not an identity to them. You know, their religion is not an identity, but because of what's happening, ISIS is the embodiment of the religious right that was created by the Western current Western society. I don't want to go too much into colonial history, but there were many a times that, for example, in North Africa, there were many countries that had extremely progressive values, and then when the French colonists they came along, they kind of taught them values like homophobia and conservatism, But now they switched the coin. Now they call people from these countries as being regressive, and I see it as just a repetition of that times as well, because during those old times they would call these people regressive for having nude beaches essentially, or just not just actually having fun in life. And then now that they have radicalized them into a more strict and fundamentalist form of Christianity and of fundamental Islam, they say, yeah, now you're being regressive. It's the idea of supremacy and superiority that I see in the religious right, especially. Which brings us to Christianity. I think the problems with Christianity historically are many, but for now, I've just summoned 5 points. The first one is that it enables white nationalism because of the identity being, Christian more than, for example, white as a word. It doesn't make sense to be white. Why you could be English or French or Spanish or German, but the idea of white nationalism, which as we can see, we have actually another far-right party in Austria, and thankfully didn't pick up in the UK, but not for the right reasons. But all they think about is being white is an identity, which doesn't make sense. We have different cultures, there's different everything in it, but this is enabled through Christianity, through the idea that other religions and other people need to be converted to be saved because they are born of sin. And we're not going to go into, of course, how Christianity, how the Bible views darker skin colors. That's another issue. So that's where Christian values is really a misnomer, because progressivism or liberty values or understanding human rights did not come from Christianity, and yet countries until today like to say things like this is based on Christian values as if that's a good thing. And I think it's a remnant of colonial past, which we should definitely not be proud of that at all. Then there's also the erasure of European culture, which is sad because so many times there's festivals and just important cultural points that are really nice, but then you're supposed to discard all that to be Christian, and then you become, basically it just erases your base culture just the same way as colonists have tried time again to erase indigenous cultures, whether it is in Australia or America or in Africa. It is in a similar way, but because of this idea that if you have white skin, you have a history with colonial past, it means you don't really get in touch with your culture. So it's basically a death trap, like being a Christian and joining the religious right is just bound to happen, as it has happened many times before, even during the times of the Crusades and during Hitler with the Nazis. This is the same model, and it's going to keep happening now, especially in America. The point of why it's going to happen.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you there because I know that you're going to move on to another religion. So let's just talk about Christianity. Christianity itself is the biggest farce in the world, and the reason why it's so prevalent in Europe is because from the Middle Ages, it was used to, dominate Europe. Like, we talk about the church and the state all the time, but even just to show how absurd and how ideologically dominating this is, just look at Northern Ireland and the religious, unrest that they had with the people of the Republic of Ireland. They were Protestants first, Catholics, and this is all Christianity. So these Northern Irish people are actually defending a religion and killing for their religion, when their religion is literally exists purely so that King Henry VIII can divorce as many wives. So he created a new religion called Protestantism, and that's what that religion is. is an abomination of Catholicism. So, this is, I'm just bringing out how stupid religion is, really, to tell you the truth. It's stupid that people buy into it, but it's also very cleverly constructed to dominate the minds of the people, in the same way that money now is the dominating religion. People worship money, of course. So moving on now to your next religion, and the point that you're making, that the religious right always forms together. So please tell us how that's going to continue to happen.
Is because in Judaism, Christianity and Islam, there's a prophecy of the end times. This is where actually Judaism has the more troublesome part of the religious right, because of the apartheid country of Israel that is based on the prophecy. And countries like America and, capitalists, the reason why they are helping them because of their Christian values, they tell them that the prophecy of end times has to happen. And for it to happen, Jews have to be in Jerusalem. And they're willing to do so through exploitation and through apartheid. So that's why even in present day Jewish community, you find archaic forms of religious extremism and the general denial of authority in whichever country that religious fundamentalists are staying in. Now, this is important because it basically feeds into the right. I think I said this in the previous episode, but as long as a far right group exists, it will breed more right groups. Like, there's this one extremist group, if we have an extremist Christian club, why don't we have an extremist Muslim club? Why don't we have an extremist Judaist club? It is basically that same way. So because Christianity is having a rise of the far right, and because they like to talk about, the far right of Christianity, they like to talk about the Jews being a problem, then the religious fundamentalists on Judaism's side, they're going to do the same thing as well. And that is troublesome because the apartheid state mostly, and because it has ties to the beginning of fascism. Because anyways, Islam and Christianity do stem from Judaism. So it is troublesome that the religious right is like it's like a ripple effect. Christianity started it, and then it's spreading like wildfire between religion. And of course, it's not that dangerous right now in the West. Like, we don't have terrorism, we don't have the Crusades, we don't have Christian youth feeling violent. But we do have white nationalism, and that is endorsed by Christianity, and it's only a matter of time, if we don't do anything about it, that people will use Christianity to link between white nationalism and then the current, like, present day mildly Christian youth.
Yeah, really interesting history of Israel that you mentioned there, and how Christianity and Islam actually comes from the religion of Judaism. Interesting, yeah. So this is a subject I haven't actually really considered an awful lot. This is why I appreciate your contribution to it. I'd just like to say that talking about these crusades not happening anymore, I'd agree that what Israel's doing, well, it is a crusade, a crusade against the Palestinians. Like, I'm sure you know that. I just wanted to put that in a way that our listeners could recognise.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so next up, please tell us why you think a moral victory on the left is not actually a victory at all.
I've already mentioned how Bernie, he lost to Clinton. He's just dropping out, and the idea of, I had the right idea, but I'm not even going to give it to you as a choice, which is, again, the fake sense of democracy that capitalism provides. That is not a victory, because a moral victory doesn't count. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, we're going to have much more exploitation. The idea that globalism and multiculturalism have as progressive values is good. But I think, and thanks to liberalism and like social justice kind of stuff, I think it has been perverted. Especially multiculturalism has been perverted. Right, I'm going to give you an example, but there was a time where, like, it's always a kind of an unspoken thing that the police doesn't really work, like they don't really, the idea that the police being racist in other countries, but I don't think so in Britain, it's rather that they don't care. It's rather that they're more afraid of being racially profiled than actually doing their job. I don't think that individual policemen think so, but I think because of PR and because of what the liberal media is pushing against the police as the police being racist and whatever, so they respond by complete apathy when it comes to when it came to a case of a man dying, and I never really felt like they cared. And it's because of the idea of multiculturalism of, let them deal with their own problems. And if we deal with that, we're then going to be the bad ones. That is, again, another one of them moral victories that end up detrimental to our communities.
Yeah, most definitely, because again, even if Bernie would have won, it wouldn't have been any resemblance of a victory whatsoever. He would not have been able to get a single thing past Congress. How the hell would he? They all hate him. They all thought he was a joke. He can't just make things happen by himself. So yeah. Also, regarding police in the UK not being racist, I think Mark Duggan, who of course got shot dead, would disagree. There are instances of police brutality in the UK, but a very interesting point when it comes to like police not wanting to pursue charges against a minority, in fear of them themselves being labelled racist. I know that the right-wing people have actually picked this up, and this is actually used to foment even more racism and alienation with a minority, because there was this Rochdale event where there was meant to be a secret grooming group, and the Rochdale police never done anything about it because they were indeed worried about being seen as racism, when of course they should have not have hesitated to free these flipping kids being held captive by a grooming gang. So that's one example where the police have hesitated to not actually be seeing racism. Very interesting point, and also more interesting because of how this is picked up and spread all around Twitter by absolute racists. So it's crazy to think they're both acting and being seen as a racist and not failing to do something because you might be seen as a racist, really leads to the same effect of further racism. So yeah, please continue with that point. What else is a moral victory?
Another moral victory that is very bad is the misinformation during Brexit. Like, we can't complain that vote was bad and that it went south, and at the same time we have failed to provide enough information to the masses and say, maybe this guy was lying, or Nigel Farage was lying, and they were creating crazy numbers about how much we're paying the EU. Okay, yeah, maybe these are lies, but just pointing out that they're lies doesn't mean that you've done any better. That's just the main 4 examples I have on moral victories and how they're extremely frustrating when it comes to that.
Yeah, nice one for that. So they were all interesting points. So regarding Brexit, I mean, I don't really look to electoral politics shit, as you can see, because it's all just some way for the bourgeoisie to debate amongst themselves on which way they want capitalism to go, and as well as how to get better investments for themselves. And this Brexit was really, again, I've mentioned in a previous episode, just the same way that Trump was talking about closing the borders, Brexit was the UK's version of doing it, just to get the people rallying behind racism once again, and to argue amongst ourselves once again, instead of going, well, why the fuck do we need a Brexit? Why do we need to be in the EU? Why isn't the world just sustainable? And why don't we have these relations and laws and rights anyway? The point I want to raise on the subject is that now that we're not in the EU, we have no human rights. The UK is scrapping it, they're replacing it with a British Bill of Rights. So again, this is just basically we're going to go to shit. We're going to end up buying chlorine fucking coated chicken from the United States. Obviously, just look at the diabetes, look at how many people die overweight, look at all the health problems that the American population have. Monsanto foods, no thank you, I don't like poison, but that's what we're going to be eating because our food standards are gone, and obviously we are what we eat. And again, we can't pick berries off a fucking tree outside anymore because all there is concrete and road and land everywhere. So we have to sell a label to buy shit from shops, and everything that's going to be in the shop is going to be artificial and toxic and give us all cancer. That's why 1 out of 4 people in the world are going to die of cancer. So yeah, I mean, it's either going to be me, you, or 2 of these listeners now, unfortunately, and that's down to a diet. That's really the main thing that pisses me off about Brexit, is diet, nutrition, and Bill of Human Rights. We have got to finish up now, unfortunately. I could speak to you forever. I'd love to go into feminism, but unfortunately I'm not going to have the time. I've got to go and get me labour exploited by work. So before we finish up, the any more topics that you want to squeeze in and mention, we are all ears. Before we just finish up on where people can find you, find your work, follow you online, give you support, and discuss these issues further.
Right, yeah, I'd love to talk. If you'd like to talk to me, I'm on Twitter, writer_Zola. That's writer_ZOLA. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm also on Medium, but yeah, if you could go in my Twitter, you get linked to my Medium. Please check the Medium out mostly, and Twitter, because I post mostly ex-Muslim stuff on the blog, but I will post a lot more lifestyle, and I even have poetry there. So do check my Twitter out, and then...
Awesome. Yeah, I should reiterate that people should definitely go and check out your Medium. You are an excellent writer, really interesting talking points there, really interesting works of art. Also, you've got a Patreon, your Patreon off the top of your head, so people can go in there, give you any support you need there, because we all need an extra bit of hand to make ends meet.
Yeah, but that's also linked to my Twitter. Thanks for having me on the show, Shibs.
My pleasure. Really interesting points there. It was a bit challenging because these, again, just topics that people don't really talk about very often, so I really had to get my brain going there. I hope that I was able to contribute with analysis there. I do love you down to earth, openly blunt, but really thoughtful and considerate heart that you put into all the work that you produce so that we could come on and have these discussions. Yeah, awesome stuff. Do keep in touch. You can reach me the same place everybody else. My social media is pretty much everywhere. It's easy to find. You can find on my Twitter, you can find all the links to everything else there. But massive thank you to Zola. It was really interesting and informative. I'm going to go away enlightened. I hope the listeners will do as well. Zola, again, thank you so much. We actually was meant to do a recording earlier on, and I couldn't do it because I was really upset over my son. I miss him, and yeah, I was fucking crying my eyes out, and Zola actually was understanding, and we just rescheduled, and she actually stayed on to speak to me and cheer me up for a bit. So Zola, I'll never forget that. Thank you. I'm including it in the podcast so it stays for posterity. Yeah, friend forever, love you. To everybody else, Ryan is going to be on every other episode. We just had a bit of a mix up in our planning. So with that said, all love to our listeners. Workers and lumpen of the world, unite.
All our people need to hear this. It's a lot of names on my hit list. Mouth still say what he wants to. Pussy still wet like a big bitch. I should run the whole blog at this rate. They using my name for clickbait. Bitches even wanna start fake beef. See the little weave in the mixtape. They know I'm the bomb, they ticking me off. Say anything to get a response. I know that mean they traffic is slow. Somebody just gotta price it along. So for being tame, I'd rather be wild. Bitches my name for clickbait. Bitches even wanna start fake beef. Just sell a little weave in the mixtape. They know I'm the bomb, they ticking me off. Say anything to get a response. I know that mean they traffic is slow. Somebody just gotta price it along. So for being tame, I'd rather be wild. Bitches is bending, they wanna be down. Soon as these bitches got something to sell, they say my name, Destiny Child. Heard that talking, I'm calling it out. Public opinions from private accounts. You not a check, then you gotta bounce. I got the drip, come get it now. They do anything for clout. Do anything for clout. Bitches is mad, bitches is trash. It's to the drought. Everybody wanna be lit. Everybody wanna be rich. Everybody wanna be this. If us you, I'll hate me, bitch. Free my problems and suck my dick.